Hi guys, in the previous video we saw how to display the lightning data table using the data that was fetched from the server. We displayed the list of related contacts in this table. In this video we will be developing a small filter functionality using a text box and a button. In order to do that, let's add few more code to our lightning component. We have added an attribute called search key of type string. We use this attribute to hold the search key that the user enters when he needs to filter out the data. Next, we add the text box that is used to hold the data that is entered by the user. If you see the value attribute, we have binded it with the attribute search key, which means whenever the user enters some data, it automatically gets binded to the search key attribute. Next, we add the button. So when the user clicks on this button, the framework calls the filter contacts function that is present in the controller. Now let's add the code for the filter contacts function. We have added the code for the filter contacts function. This code is very much similar to the init function that we saw in the previous video. The one thing that is new here is the helper. So if you see here, we have written in line helper.filterContactsData and we have passed an argument, the component. This particular function will be defined in the helper. In this way, our code is much cleaner. So let's define this function filter contacts data in our helper. Now we have defined the function filter contacts data in our helper. In order to call this helper function from our controller, we use the object helper dot filter contacts data. That is the name of the function. So we use this helper keyword or the argument to call all the functions of the helper. The code in this helper function is very similar to what we saw in the previous video. It just fetches the list of contacts from the apex method filter contact list. It gets the record ID and it passes the parameters. Let's take a look at the filtered contact list apex method. So this is the new filtered contact list apex method. So as we know, we have added the @aura enable annotation so that this particular function can be called from the lightning component. So this particular method takes in two arguments. One is the account ID, the other one is the keyword that is entered by the user. So when we call this function from our component, as parameters we pass two arguments. One is the account ID and the other one is the key. So we have the query to fetch the contacts based on the account ID and the keyword, and it returns the list of contacts just as it did in the previous method. You see here, we are getting the keyword that is entered by the user using the attribute search key, and the code is component.get of v.searchKey. This gets the value of the attribute search key, which holds the user entered keyword. Once we set the parameters to our action, we define the callback. So in our callback function, as we did earlier, we are just setting the v.myData, that is the object or a list of contacts that needs to be assigned to a data table. From the response, we get the value of the response using the method response.getReturnValue. As always, we use the $A namespace along with the enqueueAction function in order to enqueue our server-side action. This does the necessary processing after all the JavaScript code to get the data from the server. Now let's refresh our component and see what changes have taken place. I guess I need to refresh my screen again. So apart from the data table, we have a new components on screen. One is the text box that we created, the other one is the button. Let's say if I type FOR, click on filter, it filters out the record which contains the keyword FOR. So the filter functionality is working now. So what we have done is we have added a text box, an attribute to hold the value of the text box, and a button. On click of a button, we have called a JavaScript controller function, filter contacts. The code for the filter contacts is defined in the JavaScript controller. We have also learned how to use the helper. It is very much similar to the controller, like we write a function and then we call it using the helper object. If you see our output, the text box and the button doesn't seem to look neat. In order to make it look better, we do a small changes to our component. We use the lightning colon layout component. It is one of the base components that we use to set the layout neatly. So this particular lightning colon layout has a child component layout item. Let's copy paste this code into our component. We have used the lightning colon layout base component and we have set multiple rows equals to true, which means each layout item will be put in a separate row. The first layout item contains the text box and the second layout item contains the button. So the button will appear below the text box and there will be some padding around it. We have set the size equals to 12 so that it takes up all the 12 units of width in that model dialog. Now let's take a look at the component. Now our component looks slightly better than our previous version. So in this series of videos, we learned how to develop a Lightning component using the Lightning component framework from scratch. We developed a simple component to display a list of related contacts from the account. We learned how to get the account ID into the quick action using the interface hasRecordID. We learned how to asynchronously get the list of contacts from the server, as well as do some changes with the layout and make our screen look beautiful. We also learned how to use buttons call a function from the button click, and then do some action with that. This is all that is needed to get started with the Lightning Component Framework. Thank you.